Okay, so Eldon Hilliard, I'm from Common Ground Co-Housing. I'm not alone here. There's a good few of us in the audience. You can stick up your hands. Okay, so we're a community of 66 people, and we're looking to take the initiative and build our own houses in a co-housing way. It's been really encouraging hearing the speakers today, especially John and Darach, saying about state bodies in Ireland are open and have an appetite for promoting co-housing in the country. I must say that going into our project, it wasn't necessarily our experience with state bodies that there was the appetite there. So we felt that we needed to do a lot of the work ourselves before we approached them. So we've produced this brochure, which is the precursor to our development plan. But I think coming from this meeting today, we'll have a lot more openness to approaching organizations like yourself and John O'Connor from the Housing Agency to collaborate with us on what you guys want to see. So one of the messages I've taken from John O'Connor's opening speech was that there needs to be a consistent approach to co-housing so that it is scalable and it's no longer a niche in the housing options. I think what really motivated us was the fact that we're not reinventing the wheel here. We have a template there from Lilac Leeds, who are actively mentoring our group at every stage of our process. They have been operational for 6 years. Their members enjoy a quality of life which is beyond anything that I've witnessed in the UK or in Ireland previously. I know there's an appetite for the cost rental market at the moment, where we're looking to develop in the South Dublin, North Wicklow area. The cost rental schemes that are coming on board offer housing €1,300 for a two-bedroom house, and there's no equity in that scheme. Lilac Leeds can offer a two-bedroom apartment in their scheme for €820 a month, and those members get equity. Should they leave the scheme, the equity they get back will be released back in and paid for back by the trust. So we're really excited about championing this model and working with the state agencies here. And I suppose my question to mostly John and Darach, and if he was here, Rosie, I'm really impressed with the fact that you have a one-stop shop to help groups. That's not something that I'm aware of happening in our area, but I think it's something that really could be fertilized and sent out around the country as a good practice for local authorities to do. But I suppose my question is, how can groups like ours approach state bodies, get the support we need so that we're not doing it all by ourselves, and that we can collaborate and find a mechanism that you're happy with, financial institutions are happy with, and that gives people agency in their own housing.
So Darach or John, do you want to take that question on or give some insights at how we open doors from the bottom up to the top?
Well, I'll give you a couple of my own personal kind of thoughts as my neurons, the few of them that I have start switching on in my brain. I guess, you know, some of the things. I think there's a growing realization in the state sector around innovation and trying to find solutions to the growing affordability issue that we have, and I guess that's really why the LDA was set up in any case, and you can obviously see it echoed through the local authorities as well as from Darach. So I think it feels to me that there's more of a recognition of the issue and an openness to providing solutions for the problem. And I can sense that at a political level as well. I guess the interactions and that have happened today, certainly from my interactions with Tom, have just been through Tom's initiative in terms of making those initial interactions. That's why I'm here today, and that's why it's gathering kind of momentum in. So it's like sowing a seed, and I talk to Darach, and Darach's talking to the Minister for Housing, and all this sort of stuff. So it starts generating its own momentum. And I think if you look at cost rental, which has got some serious momentum now and is seen as a real viable thing, not a panacea, but something that could be suitable for people at a point in time in their lives, that's got real momentum. And there was no talk about that a couple of years ago. So I don't see why co-housing or community-led housing could be any different. And I think what you mentioned there about consistency of approach, I think that's really important, so that the establishment per se doesn't have 100 different formats or versions of it. A model almost that can be put forward, I think, is something that will really assist. And then I think once you do that, I think the idea of having a stakeholders group formed, which there's a lot of important parts. It's yourselves, it's banks is a big part. It's not straightforward mortgage products on leasehold interests, and obviously sources of land like ourselves, builders. I see Hugh there from Coleman. So I think some sort of a working group that meets on a scheduled basis to try and advance a set of objectives bound in time, I think would be useful.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Darach?
Very much to echo that. I suppose the opportunities there for you to look where are the win-win situations from yourselves and from the local authority, from LDA. What can you bring to the table that will help the local authority, LDA, achieve its objectives? And I suppose that's the space that we're in. On Dublin City Council's behalf, we're happy to sit down with a working group, like as John mentioned there, and bring sort of advice, bring its resources, put it on the table, be open, be accountable, work up a feasibility study. And I think what John says is absolutely right. It echoes what Stephen said earlier on. If you can get a model, if we can get a pilot built as such, then that becomes less of a concept, and then it becomes something that's living and that's concrete. And I think that's the way to go forward. But it's, as I said again, this is going to take time. It's going to require resilience, and it's going to require. I think you mentioned in Brussels there, it takes a number of years. So I think you just need that resilience to. But where there's a will, there's a way.
Brilliant. Rosie, there's a question for you. Can you elaborate on participation or citizen participation? Who participates? How do they contribute? How is their contribution integrated in your programs, particularly housing? Is it community-led?
I think it isn't at the moment. I don't think there's any reason why it can't be. And I was just listening here and thinking, there were two things that struck me here. One was the database of the small sites, and the other was the small builders, small site scheme. And it occurs to me that there's nothing stopping people from going around, finding small sites, and asking the local authority to look at them in terms of dereliction or vacancy. We have a requirement to look at those, and we tend to be a little bit reactive to that now. So if people ask us to look at them, we go out and look at them, but we're only starting to get that sort of ability to go out and look at more of them. But certainly if somebody writes in and asks us to look at them, we will. If people come forward with plans and talk to somebody who's in a housing department looking for pilot, the more work that can be done to kind of enable that contact, the better. But there are certainly mechanisms like that where people can self-report things that are derelict or vacant, kind of kickstart our legislative function in that way. And I think that actually would be useful. I don't know, I was interested in hearing from Tope whether, or other people who work in the UK, whether that small site scheme is only used for greenfield sites, or is it used for instance, existing buildings, existing historical buildings?
Mostly brownfield sites.
And what we think, I think what our strategy was kind of developed from this idea that there are an awful lot of vacancy. There are full buildings vacant. In the Georgian area in Limerick, out of the 952 buildings that we have there, we have 92 fully vacant buildings. And we have an awful lot more where they're not using the upper floors. And I think not just the local authorities, but I think private landowners might respond to, being teamed up, and that's really what we're trying to do. So I think just in terms of getting a handle on what's out there. I mean, John mentioned that we don't necessarily know ourselves all the land we own. It happens to go between different departments who might be dealing with it. So I think those are useful places to start.
Mm-hmm. There's a very interesting question here that I want to bring in. Especially in this climate emergency we face, one of the things we're going to see is more movement of peoples, moving away from uninhabitable places, and how do we accommodate them? So the question is, can we learn from what Geert was introducing on how maybe community-led housing could be a model for refugees and asylum seekers as an alternative to this direct provision, which has become a reality now for people for a long, long time. Any thoughts from anyone on the opportunity of this approach? Or Stephen, is there any models of this in the UK?
Do you want to go first?
I think at the moment there isn't very much of that kind of thing going on. I think there's a very common perception politically that community-led housing is a kind of a lifestyle choice for people who are relatively well off. I think particularly the co-housing. And there is some element of truth in that, but that's primarily a function of the absence of appropriate financial institutions to make it easy to do. Tom was showing the slide about the institutions in Germany. We don't have anything like the KfW. If we did, we'd be doing a lot more of this, and it would be much easier to do with people who are less well off. But Geert made the very important point is that the time that it does take, and I would absolutely counter any suggestion that community-led housing schemes take any longer than any other development scheme. I've been in development for 40 years. I've never met a kind of quick, easy, cheap housing scheme. They're all difficult. They all take a long time. But I think it means it's very difficult for people unless there is some really strong enabling structure of the kind that Geert was talking about, to enable people who are in more vulnerable circumstances to participate in this sort of thing. And I think in countries which have very formal planning systems, it's very difficult to have kind of interim or informal patterns of settlement that might be more accommodating for people coming in difficult circumstances. But I think what we have found was that when I mentioned in my talk the Community Empty Homes programme, that was mainly stuff outside London, in quite a lot of not very thriving towns where quite a lot of immigrants and refugees have been resettled. And so small local civil society institutions which are concerned with refugees, particularly in Hull, for instance, but also people who are out of work with not very good employable skills, mental health problems, working at a very fine grain with very disadvantaged people, working on getting these homes back into use, and then providing them with a home, but also helping them get back into labour market, reconnecting them with kind of social connections. So I think at different levels of scale, some of these things are possible.
Brilliant. Geert, anything to add to that? Or?
Well, I can confirm what Stephen said, but I think we proved that it is possible to do community-led housing also with this kind of groups. A lot of people involved in our projects are migrants or people who moved into Belgium quite recently. And of course, it asks for another approach with more enabling infrastructure. It's not like the groups, the typical co-housing groups we know who do everything by themselves. That's not possible. It wouldn't be possible. But once you start, it is amazing to see how many people really are investing a lot of their energy and a lot of their knowledge, and that, also with these groups, it is a very favorable for the projects. Mm-hmm. It is challenging, but it's possible. You need the finance, you need the enabling structures, and it is possible.
Yeah, in Cloughjordan, we're very interested right now in looking at developing housing within our neighbourhood for refugees or asylum seekers, so they're integrated into the community and bring their skills to share. Tom, you wanted to come in quick?
I just wanted to point out there's a project in the exhibition on this theme called Refugio.
Mm-hmm. So there's a project in the exhibition there. Quick question for you, Darach. Does DCC have sites available now for co-housing?
Being put on the spot.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very glad you asked me that question, because at the point in time, I know. We do have, we've identified 11 sites for affordable housing, right? So some of them are for affordable sale, some of them are for cost rental, and as I've outlined, we have a lot of regeneration projects where we'd like to introduce a mixed income into some of the communities, and so we're, as I said, we're open. We're willing
open
to sit
for
down
business.
and
there is some sites available. Yeah. Great. John, there's a question for you that's maybe a little bit more complex. Why not use state lands for 10% social, 90% affordable, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? We don't improve sustainability by handing over 60% to for-profit development.
I mean, look, you'll have to ask the government that. So we're an implementer. But look, I understand the question, and I do. I could just tell you, to give you an insight into some of the complexities, I guess. So firstly, it's a fallacy that it'll be, on a portfolio basis, because we're working with local authorities, by composition, the level of affordable housing will be in excess of 50% based on our portfolio at the moment, so it'll be much more than that. There are things that drive me crazy, like state aid, and that's a real thing. It's complex. The other thing is there is a cost implication. So, say for instance, the HSE, we're getting a land in Dundrum, the old Central Mental Hospital, and the funds from that land, and there'll be 40% social and affordable required on that land. And the funds that are being got from that land, which is the 60% private, say the social affordable bit's low or nil cost, are being recycled into mental health services. So I guess it's a choice, isn't it, that we have to make. There's a finite amount of resources there. And do we say, well, that's a piece of land and forget about the opportunity cost, which might be 100 million, put it in for housing and forget the 100 million that was going to go into mental health services? Or how do we do it? So it's not as straightforward as there's a piece of land, it's worth nothing, just make it available for free housing. It's a complex and sensitive topic. And I guess when government were conceiving of the requirement for us, it was seen to be trying to achieve some sort of a balance there.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, John. This question here is maybe more applicable to you, Eldon. Has the applicability of the mutual home ownership societies been investigated for Ireland? Now, this is a model that Lilac use in Leeds. So that's really what you're trying to do, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So I suppose what attracted us to the Leeds model was the affordability, the low environmental impact of it, and the community they built. And they achieved the affordability through this mutual home ownership society model, which was the theoretical brainchild of the New Economic Forum in the UK. It's kind of the equivalent or NESC that we have here.
Or FASTA, the Economics of Sustainability.
So the way the model works is that the development is bought and built by a trust, and then the members of the trust get their housing needs met that way. And then they pay, they have to have 10% of the build cost of their particular residence up front as a deposit, and then they pay a third of their income back towards the repayment loans for the development costs. And when they've repaid the build cost of their particular unit, it drops down to 10% of their income, and that goes into a central reserve fund for maintenance and discretionaries and other things like that. So the affordability that they achieved there was really staggering. Most of us have been over there and visited it, and my big takeaway the day that I went there was that if you were earning the equivalent of 19,000 euros in Leeds and had a 8,000 euro deposit, you could get a one-bedroom apartment in the scheme, and that just blew my mind as the affordability that they were able to achieve there. So we've been looking to try and adapt that model to the Irish context. To that end, we've been looking what legal structure will support that, whereby we can issue shares to our members. We've been consulting with people like Sam Toland to try and figure out how we can work it in the Irish context. Now, we haven't quite nailed it, but we're pretty close, and we're confident that if we can interpret the legislation in a way that we can apply it to the Irish model, context without any major legislative change or policy change or things like that. So we're close. We're in a position now that we're looking to Hire in a bit more legal expertise is one of maybe the deficiencies in our group, that we don't have that legal expertise, or be very happy for SOA or the housing agency or the land development agency to give us support. We're open to all sorts of support. We want to collaborate. We want partnerships. We want to create a model that is scalable, that takes it out of the niche, and that can be used by other groups. We're documenting and recording every step of our journey, and it's going to be available on our website. So we want to be kind of a role model for other groups, so that we have pioneered something that others don't need to go through the process that we have gone to date.
Brilliant. We're going to go to the audience. We're going to go to the audience in a second, so get ready. But I want to ask a question or seek some advice, because, John, you mentioned you were interested in what happens after the build, or the added benefits of things like co-housing that might, well, I got this from you, you might have not said it, but the added benefits of it. I visited 10 co-housing across Europe, and when I was looking at affordability. That was, how do we get an affordable model? After visiting those sites, I realized, especially in a time that we have a mental health epidemic, that this is a richer, healthier way to actually live, where we challenge this isolation, this fragmentation, and the atomization that we currently have. So maybe, Stephen, what are the added benefits as you see them of co-housing, not just as a way for people that can't afford it to house themselves, but as something that could maybe build our sustainability or resilience to cope with the challenges and to build social capital?
Okay, well, the bit of the talk that I didn't manage to get through, I dealt with the politics of affordability, but the other bit was basically the politics of health and well-being. So there's some, I mean, Maria will talk tomorrow about the Ouch scheme, which has very particular benefits for older people, the idea of kind of mutual self-care as people age. Mm-hmm. But I think there are broader things about loneliness. So the UK government has a cross-departmental strategy on loneliness. How did we ever get to a state of affairs when government needed to have a policy about that? But it does. And one of the things that they're doing, they're just in the process of commissioning some research on loneliness, looking at co-housing, not just the kind of experience of living in the co-housing, but also the experience of making the scheme happen, process of co-production, is what can they tell us about things that would help prevent loneliness and promote better mental health. I think there are particular examples in remoter rural areas, and I'm sure it's a problem here as it is in the UK. Older people living in very isolated places, very difficult to get services to them and for them to get to services. So are there ways in which we can kind of reimagine how people might live in rural areas where you get some of that kind of mutuality and support? I know Architecture and Design for Scotland have been looking at more appropriate forms of rural settlement in the kind of the design guidance they give, and looking at things which look, to all intents and purposes, like small clusters of farm buildings, buildings around a courtyard, different kinds, and where my wife comes from in Kerry, just around the back of their house is exactly one of those kind of courtyards, two empty houses because the farmers have built themselves new bungalows. You've got a whole suite of buildings, only one of which is used for the farm, and it's just sitting there. An extraordinary resource of embodied carbon, but a kind of a physical thing that fits in the landscape. Are there ways in which we can kind of reimagine some of those things to provide different ways of living, but not taking people out of their community, enabling them to stay in places that are familiar? I think I probably said enough.
Great. Anyone else on the panel before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I want to add to that, Davie, just in terms of the possibilities for urban regeneration. We think particularly around step-down accommodation and getting people to downsize, move into cities. I think if you look at it practically from a clustered health care provision, there's obvious savings, but then from a much broader sense, you have a lot of very healthy and active people who are fantastic in terms of contributing to their community, there's volunteering, just increase in terms of the civic nature of their occupancy. And if you look at city centres, they have very few older people living in them. And yet we constantly have people say, I'd love to live in, George and Limerick, if only I could find a suitable accommodation. So, I think there's definitely added benefits. I don't know how they're quantified at the moment, and I think a lot of that is the difficulty.
Okay.
I think as well from our experience with developing our own community, because we're have not developed our place, but we're developed as a community, weekends away and things like this. But you know, one of the big takeaways from Lilac was the way that they designed it so that there was these natural areas that you interact with your neighbors. So they put all the parking around the perimeter. There's these like avenues where you don't need to go reach out to find someone. You're naturally going to bundle and meet them in the laundry or meet them in the shared common spaces. And that itself just creates an openness for people to kind of go out and interact and not feel this pressure that they have to initiate. Or they can be their own silent private person, but then they're meeting the community just in the way that it's designed and flows.
I definitely echo that, because Cloughjordan, if anyone's visited, you get a different feel whenever you walk in, and it's because it's designed for people, not designed for the car, which most of our housing estates are designed. I'd love if there were some contributions from the floor. A very enthusiastic hand going up there. So quickly, there's a microphone coming to you. Wait until the mic comes. That'll be good for the audio.
I live in the north inner city. There is an organisation up in Phibsborough called Reimagining Phibsborough. I actually live on Blessington Street. And what we have done over the last couple of years with the horror that is Bus Connect and driving the equivalents of Clanbrassil Street right through the whole of Dublin City, not seeing destruction like that since the 60s and 70s. If we've actually started to look at our area to see where there are plots. I'm part of SAO, just by the way. Right. And we've started to look at where there are plots, because Dublin City Council has said, you know, there's very little land in the inner city between the canals, and there's a lot of us, some of us here, who actually want to remain living in the inner city, the north inner city and the south inner city. And what we have identified is that if you start to look at the lanes that exist in Victorian and Georgian Dublin, which Dublin City Council, incidentally, sees as a huge problem, and currently it is, sort of, and a lot of residents' response to that is, how can we gate it off? Looking at it, our response has been, well, actually, when you walk them and look at them, there's huge amounts of land in those back lanes, which if you actually took collectively and developed land, you would then be having doors opening onto, which gives passive security, footfall, etc., cycle paths and all the rest of it. Yeah. There is a massive land bank there, which we're not utilising, and we should really be reimagining.
Thank you. Other contributions, other voices from the floor?
Davie?
Hugh? Where?
Can I respond to that quickly, Davie? Can I just respond to that quickly?
Quickly. And then Hugh, then Emer.
Yeah, I would just echo that. And like in Cork, where I'm from, there's also a process of closing public lanes as well. And public lanes in Cork are an absolutely fundamental part of the city. So I kind of understand the Community Land Trust as an opportunity to look at this process of kind of privatisation and use the Land Trust as a kind of vehicle for having a kind of an ongoing sort of republification of these spaces. Yeah.
Hugh, before you come in as a facilitator, I have to ask your permission. It's 2 o'clock. We said we're finishing at 2 o'clock. Can we go for another 10 minutes? Is that all right? Okay. Look after yourself if you need to. Hugh Brennan.
Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, Hugh Brennan from O'Connor. First of all, thanks to everybody for the contributions, and thanks to SOA. It really is a marvellous conference. I just wanted to address the land issue, because the land is really big, and John knows where I'm coming from in this, but I want to just address the point about the money that the state feels that they have to get for that particular site in Dundrum or any site. It is not the developer who is paying for that. It is not the developer who's giving that money to hand over to the mental health services. It's the 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 people who are living there who are going to pay for it. And where is the equity in that? Where is the equity that says that 400 people should put that money into the health service? Rather, make the land available for affordable housing, and even if you do sell them, every single house that you sell, you're going to get 25% of the purchase price back into the exchequer anyway. because it'll come back through VAT, it'll come back through all of the other taxes. The state never needs to make this capital gain on the price of land, especially during a housing crisis. And I'll just leave it at there. Just thanks again to everybody.
Brilliant. Hold on, you're going with the microphone. Can you pass it to here, please?
Thank you. Emer O'Shukru from the Community Land Trust Initiative. Just coming again to the question of land and the affordability of it. In the Community Land Trust model, it is possible for the land to be paid for over a long period of time, so that there are many advantages of that. In some cases, it's not possible. But when we looked at it, and we looked at St. Michael Estates in particular, that it had the great advantage of Community Land Trust of enabling cost rental and affordable housing to buy that was off balance sheet. Having looked at the Altmark judgment in particular, which I think is worth for the Land Development Agency to look at that very seriously. That can be done. The other thing is, you mentioned the fact that architects are being hired now to look at various schemes. I would like to suggest that if communities get together for particular sites with their own architects, and I'm particularly including SOA, but there are many other young architects and older architects who want to contribute and are willing to contribute on a no-fault, no-fee basis, that they would be allowed to do that in conjunction with the community so that they can co-design without being excluded from getting the work later, for instance, and it would help do the work for the agency. Thank you.
Thank you. This will have to be the last voice, sorry, unless there's anyone burning to speak. Two more voices, okay.
Sarah Durkin, Social Democrats. I think it's just a comment. I don't think it's any accident that there are so many artistic and creative people involved in these processes. And when we talk about the need for collaboration and the talk of the need for facilitation, I think artists are a really untapped resource in being that connective tissue between all the different parties and really thinking about the creative that's needed in the funding process, in the development process, but most importantly, bringing people together.
Thanks for that. And the last comment here, this lady.
I just wanted to say, because Tom asked me to come over from London, I'm from Croydon Council, and we've just put our first site on the Small Sites portal a couple of weeks ago. And I just wanted to say just a quick word about what we're doing, and then maybe see if I could meet Dara afterwards and kind of maybe suggest that you might put out one of your sites in a similar way to the way we're doing it. Basically, we've got quite strong political support for community-led housing in Croydon. Croydon's a borough in the south of London with 300,000 people. We're looking at all sorts of ways of providing affordable housing, and community-led housing is one of the types. We see it an additional benefit for us as a local authority in terms of resident empowerment and devolution agenda. We're really trying to engage better with our residents. We're building loads of new homes, and there's a bit of a lack of trust there, and we see it as a good way of being able to build trust in communities, as well as building affordable homes. So we've identified some sites. We're going to put up to 5 sites out this year, and the way we're doing it is by putting it out to bidding. So groups have 8 weeks to look at a site. We give them all the due diligence around it. They go away. They can get grant funding from the Mayor's office to employ architects and work with them to develop their vision. Is this going to be, homes for young families? Is it going to be homes for, we've got women in temporary accommodation looking at potentially doing some homes for single mothers. All sorts of interesting people coming forward. And we didn't really have a big base of community groups interested before we started looking at this a few months ago. And then we're going to assess our bids when they come in based on 20% cost, and that's because we have government legislation in the UK that means that we have to at least consider best consideration for land. It could be that it is at zero value if they're doing social rent homes, but if they're doing intermediate ownership model, then we would expect some return for the land. But we're looking at the bids in terms of 80% on quality, so that's social value, community value, long-term affordability, who are these homes for, design quality, sustainability, all of the things that make this type of housing really special. And we're getting to, so the bids that are best in 80% on quality, they're going to hopefully win. So watch this space. I've got some more information if anyone's interested.
Great. There might be a bit of space for networking. Thanks for bringing that in. Okay, we have to start winding up now, so I'd just like to thank this section, Rosie, Geert, Stephen, Darach, John, Tom, and Eldon. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Jim and Colin to just wrap it up. Just before we do that, I just want to point out that what we're exploring today and tomorrow, this idea of a community-led approach to securing our housing, fits into a bigger picture of community-led initiatives that feature community energy co-ops, community food co-ops, community-supported agriculture. We're seeing a huge movement of this across Europe that this fits into, that I think can secure our needs and can make us more resilient in the faces of the challenges that we are definitely having to deal with in the next decade. So just that this exploration fits into something bigger. Community-led has a future. We need to have that participation between the bottom up and the enabling of the top down. And co-housing is definitely getting closer. It might not be here. Thank you. Jim and Colin.
Thanks very much, Jim Roach. What a wonderful morning we've had. My role here is to offer thanks to people. So I want to start with our volunteers. This could not have run so smoothly without our volunteers, and it has run fairly seamlessly, so thank you very much. Again, to all our speakers, wonderful array of viewpoints and information that we can all go away, I think, enriched with knowledge and with inspiration, and with only one question in mind: why isn't it happening here? How can we make it happen here? So very, very good, and we'll hear more tomorrow, which Colin will come on to. I want to thank all of you for coming along and for staying so long, and I know we're all ready for our lunch, so we're letting you go soon. And last but by no means least, I want to thank our sponsors. This has cost quite a bit of money to put on. We've got the venues for free to us, which has been a big help. And our sponsors, again, a wonderful array of groups. You'll see them on the back of your program here. You'll see them on the monitors out in the hall. So thank you very much to everyone, and thank you all.
Hello, my name is Colin. I'm just going to give you a quick reminder about tomorrow. So the venue is moving to Bolton Street, the Bolton Street building of TU Dublin, where the School of Architecture is. The entrance that we're using is the one on King's Inn Street, not King's Inn's entrance, as it incorrectly says there. So that is the kind of street that runs between Parnell Street and Bolton Street, just beside Bloss Cafe there. Tomorrow is kind of envisaged as being a slightly more open, interactive type format. So there's workshops and there's stands, there's film screenings, there's also more talks. And because of the workshops, you'll probably get a chance, anyone who's able to come tomorrow, to ask more questions of some of the experts that we've invited and get into more detailed discussions. It's a full day, and since you're probably all starving now, there's actually a lunch tomorrow as well if you manage to make it along. So thanks again to everyone for coming, and hopefully see you tomorrow.